The last thing Amara Brooks expected on the worst night of her life was to fall onto a mafia boss. Not stumble, not bump. Fall. Full weight, both hands, her face inches from his in the absolute dark, his body going rigid beneath her like she'd pressed a blade against his throat. He didn't scream, he didn't move, he just stopped breathing. And somehow, that terrified her more than anything else in that mansion. She'd walked into his room by accident. She was looking for a 4-year-old boy in a blackout, in a house the size of a hotel, while somewhere below them men with guns were moving through the corridors. She wasn't supposed to be there. She wasn't supposed to touch him. Everyone who worked inside Kong Jae-hyun's household knew the single rule that mattered above all others. You did not touch the boss. Not his shoulder, not his arm, not even the sleeve of his jacket. And here she was, hands flat against his chest, his heart hammering so hard she could feel it through her palms. If you've ever been in a moment where you just knew, that one wrong move would break something that could never be fixed, then you already understand what Amara felt in that darkness. What would you have done? Before we go further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way through. Drop a like and tell me in the comments. What city or country are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. 3 weeks before that night, Amara Brooks was sitting in a hospital waiting room in Atlanta, Georgia, eating a vending machine sandwich that tasted like cardboard and trying very hard not to cry in public. She was not the kind of woman who cried easily. She'd learned young that crying didn't pay rent, didn't fix anything, and mostly just gave other people the impression you couldn't handle yourself. She could handle herself. She'd been handling herself since she was 19, when their mother died, and she became, by default, the person responsible for her younger sister, Naomi. Naomi was 22 now. She had lupus that had quietly been destroying her kidneys for 2 years, and the specialist had used words in their last appointment that Amara was still trying to translate into something survivable. Dialysis, transplant evaluation, insurance coverage gaps, numbers with too many zeros. The sandwich was stale. The coffee from the machine down the hall had given her acid reflux for 4 hours. She had $43 in her checking account and a rejection email from a nanny agency sitting in her inbox that she hadn't been able to delete yet because deleting it felt like giving up. She was 26 years old and she was already tired in a way that didn't have a name. Her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize. International prefix, but she'd looked up enough of them in job searches over the past month to know it was South Korean. She answered because, at this point, what was the worst that could happen? Miss Brooks? The voice was male, formal, with an accent that smoothed certain consonants in a way she found precise rather than cold. My name is Director Yoon. I represent the Kong household in Seoul. You applied through a private international placement registry 4 weeks ago. She had. She barely remembered it. She'd applied to 47 positions across 6 countries in a single desperate evening, firing off her resume like a distress signal. Yes, she said carefully. We have reviewed your qualifications, your background in childhood trauma support, your experience with nonverbal children, your references from the Maddox family in Boston. A pause. We would like to offer you a position. Amara looked at the fluorescent light above her head. It buzzed faintly, like it was also exhausted. Can I ask what the household is like? Another pause, longer this time. The child is 4 years old. His name is Min Jun. He does not speak. He has not spoken in 14 months. A brief hesitation, as though the next part required careful phrasing. The household has employed 6 nannies in that time. None have remained longer than 3 weeks. Amara absorbed this. Why do they leave? The environment is demanding. The guardian is a private man. He values discipline and silence. The previous candidates found the atmosphere difficult. Difficult how? Miss Brooks. His voice shifted slightly. Not warmer, but something closer to honest. The compensation package includes return flights, full room and board, and a monthly salary of 18,000 American dollars. There is also a one-time signing bonus of 15,000 paid upon arrival. Amara stopped breathing for a moment. What's the catch? She said flatly. The position requires full commitment. You would be resident in the household. Contact with the outside would be limited during the initial adjustment period. And the child's guardian is, he seemed to search for the word, uncompromising. She did the math in her head. Not slowly. She'd been doing desperate financial math in her head for 2 months, and she was fast at it now. 3 months of that salary covered Naomi's first round of treatment. The signing bonus covered the gap in their insurance. 6 months meant they were no longer drowning. When would I need to start? She said. We would need you in Seoul within the week. She looked down the hospital hallway. Naomi was behind one of those doors, hooked to a machine, and she was out here eating a cardboard sandwich because she couldn't afford the cafeteria. I'll be there, Amara said. Oh, she did not sleep on the flight. 14 hours across the Pacific, and she sat upright in her economy seat with a folder on her lap. Everything she could find about childhood selective mutism, trauma-induced silence, and developmental regression in toddlers. She'd worked with a nonverbal child before, a 7-year-old boy in Boston whose parents were going through a brutal custody battle. He'd stopped talking for 8 months. It had taken patience, consistency, and the complete absence of pressure to get the first word out of him. She could do this. She told herself that for 14 hours. What she did not do was research the name Kang Jae-hyun. Director Yoon had mentioned it only once, and she hadn't thought to type it into a search engine. Later, she would understand that this was possibly the single most significant piece of ignorance she had ever carried into a room. The car that picked her up at Incheon Airport was not a car. It was a vehicle. A black SUV so large it had its own internal climate zone, driven by a man who introduced himself as Park, and then said nothing else for the entire journey. The interior smelled like expensive leather and something faintly antiseptic, and the partition between front and back was slightly raised, which she found odd. They drove for 40 minutes before the city fell away. Then they were on a mountain road, switchbacks carving upward through dense trees, and the rain that had been threatening since she landed finally arrived all at once. A hard, aggressive storm that turned the windows into blurred gray nothing. The mansion materialized out of the storm like something from a film. She knew intellectually that it was a house, but standing in front of it, black stone, severe lines, windows like watching eyes. Her first actual thought was that it looked like the kind of place that had a dungeon. She was soaking wet before she reached the front door because nobody came out to escort her, and her umbrella had turned inside out on the 3rd step. She pushed through the entrance and immediately started dripping on a floor that probably cost more per square foot than her apartment's monthly rent. The entrance hall was the size of her old elementary school gymnasium. The air temperature was approximately 40 degrees lower than outside. Tall windows, dark walls, absolute silence except for the rain hammering the glass. A man was standing at the far end of the room. He was not what she expected. She'd spent the car ride imagining someone older, 50, heavy, the kind of crime boss who existed in the American movies she'd grown up watching. Overweight, rings on every finger, a cigar. Kang Jae-hyun was 32 years old and the kind of physically precise that suggested the discipline of someone who treated his body like another weapon he needed to keep operational. Dark suit, no tie, collar open. Gloves, black leather, which struck her as strange indoors. His face was still in the way that certain faces were still when the person wearing them was accustomed to never letting anything show. He was staring at her the way you stared at a problem you hadn't accounted for. "You're late," he said. His English was nearly accent-free, which surprised her. "There was a storm," she said. "There was a forecast. The storm was anticipated." "My flight landed when it landed." She looked down at the floor. The puddle forming around her feet was genuinely impressive. "Do you have a towel?" Something shifted on his face. Not quite an expression, more like the place where an expression almost happened, and then didn't. He stared at her for a moment. "Han," he said, without raising his voice. A woman appeared, 50s, efficient, dressed in dark clothing, and handed Amara a towel before disappearing again with the specific speed of someone long practiced at invisibility. Amara dried her face, wrapped the towel around her hair, and looked back at Kang. He was still watching her. She had the distinct and uncomfortable feeling that he was recalibrating something. "I need to see the child," she said. "Minjun, before anything else. The paperwork and orientation can happen after." "The child is asleep." "Then I'll look at his room, his things. I need to understand what he's surrounded by before I can start. You've been in this house for 4 minutes, and the longer we stand here having this conversation, the longer it takes me to do the job you're paying me $18,000 a month to do. She met his eyes directly. Sir? The pause that followed was long enough that she heard the rain shift registers outside. Heavier, more insistent. She kept her chin level. Her heart was doing things she chose to ignore. Han will show you to your room, he said finally. You will be given access to the child at 8 in the morning. My household operates on schedule. I understand. You should also understand this. He took one step toward her, not close enough to crowd, but close enough that she registered the movement as deliberate. 5 women have stood where you're standing. 3 of them lasted less than a week. My nephew does not need another person who will leave him. The weight of that landed differently than she expected. It didn't sound like a warning. It sounded, underneath the formal delivery, like something that had cost him to say. I don't leave, she said. It's not really in my nature. He held her gaze for another beat. Then he turned and walked away, and she noticed, without meaning to, that he walked like a man who had learned long ago never to present his back to a room carelessly. Even turning away from her, something in his posture stayed watchful. She let out a breath she'd been holding for approximately 90 seconds. Her room was larger than her Atlanta apartment. She sat on the edge of a bed that could have slept 4 people and called Naomi, keeping her voice steady, not mentioning the part where she'd essentially just stared down a man who radiated the energy of someone who had hurt people professionally. How is it? Naomi's voice was thin. She'd been having a bad week. Different, Amara said honestly. Good different or scary different? Both. She looked at the window. The rain was still going hard. How are you feeling? Like someone replaced my joints with gravel, but Dr. Patel says the numbers look slightly less terrible this week, so... A pause. Amara, you didn't have to go to Korea. I did, though. There are nanny jobs in the U.S. Not ones that pay this. She kept her voice light. I'm fine. The kid needs help, and I can help him. That's the whole thing. After the call, she sat in the silence of the enormous room and listened to the house. That was something she always did in a new placement. Listened. A house told you things and it's quiet. This one told her that it had been quiet for a very long time. Not peaceful quiet. Not evening quiet. The kind of quiet that accumulates when nobody laughs. She didn't sleep well. The bed was too soft and the silence was too complete, and at 3 in the morning she woke up suddenly, fully alert, with the irrational conviction that someone was standing in the hallway outside her door. She lay still for 2 minutes. Nothing moved. She got up and checked anyway because she was that kind of person. The hallway was empty, but at the far end she could see light coming from under a door. Thin, pale, the kind of light a small lamp makes. And she could hear something. So soft she almost talked herself out of it. A child crying. Very quietly. The specific quiet of a child who has learned that crying loudly doesn't bring anyone. She was moving before she made the decision. Minjun was sitting on the floor of his room, back against the foot of his bed, knees pulled to his chest. He was wearing pajamas with small cars on them, and his face was wet and his eyes, when they came up to look at her, were the kind of dark that children's eyes only get when they've seen things they shouldn't have seen. He didn't make a sound when she came in. Didn't flinch. Just looked at her with that weighted, ancient look. She sat down on the floor approximately 3 feet from him. Not close. Not far. She did not speak, did not make any move toward him, did not do any of the things that well-meaning adults generally did in these situations. The crouching, the hands out, the soft coaxing voices. She just sat. He watched her. After about 4 minutes, he looked away, stared at the floor. She noticed his hands were holding something. A small toy car, red, the paint worn off in the places where he held it most. I liked that one, she said very quietly. Not to him specifically, just to the air. Red's a good color for a car. He didn't respond. She didn't expect him to. She sat for another 10 minutes and then, when his breathing had evened out and his shoulders had dropped 2 inches from where they'd been, she stood up slowly. I'll be right down the hall, she said. Same quiet register. Same place. All night. She went back to her room, left her door open 4 inches. In the morning, when she walked to the kitchen, she found a small red car sitting in the middle of the hallway floor, directly in front of her door. She picked it up carefully and put it in her cardigan pocket and did not tell anyone. Kang Jae-hyun watched the footage from the corridor camera at 5:47 a.m. before the household staff was awake. Watched the nanny pick up the car. Watched her put it in her pocket without looking around to see if anyone was watching. He watched it 3 times. In 14 months, Min-jun had not voluntarily left anything for another person. Not once. Not for his nannies, not for the household staff, not for the physicians who came monthly to evaluate his development. The boy existed in a sealed world that Kang had been unable to enter, despite trying in the only ways he knew, which were, he understood, not particularly effective ways. He had hired professionals. He had bought every recommended toy and book and therapeutic resource. He had sat outside Min-jun's door on multiple occasions and not known what to do next. The new nanny had been here for 11 hours. She'd sat on the floor of a 4-year-old's room in the middle of the night and talked to the air next to him about the color of a toy car. And the boy had given her the car. Kang turned off the monitor. He sat in his office in the pre-dawn dark with his gloved hands flat on the desk and thought about something he had not allowed himself to think about in 5 years, which was what it felt like to have someone near you who was not there because they wanted something from you or feared what you could take from them. He didn't know what to do with that thought. He closed it away. Put it back where it belonged, behind the walls he'd spent years reinforcing. But it was there, small and inconvenient and stubborn, like a red car left in the middle of a hallway. The first week moved in increments. Amara established a routine because children who had lost control over their worlds needed to know what was coming next. Breakfast at the same time, outdoor time after that, regardless of weather, quiet activities in the afternoon. The same sequence of events each day until the day became predictable and predictability became safety. Min-jun did not speak, but he stopped leaving the room when she entered it. By day 3, he was sitting near her during meals, close enough that she could hear him breathing. By day 5, he was bringing her things. Not just the car, but other objects. A picture book. A small stuffed bear with one ear nearly off. He would place them near her and then step back and watch to see what she did. She treated every object like it mattered, because to him, it did. She cooked in the kitchen herself, which apparently scandalized the household staff. The private chef was a trained professional who produced beautiful, perfectly plated meals that Min-jun consistently refused to touch. Amara made rice and eggs and a simple soup she'd learned from a YouTube channel run by a Korean grandmother in Los Angeles. Imperfect, a little salty. Min-jun ate 2 bowls. Kang appeared at the kitchen doorway that evening. She looked up from the dishes and their eyes met, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "He ate," Kang said finally. "Yeah." She turned back to the sink. "He did." Another silence. She could feel him still standing there. "The chef has worked for this household for 9 years. I'm sure he's excellent." She kept washing. "Min-jun doesn't want excellent right now. He wants something that smells like someone's house." She heard him leave, didn't hear him come back. But the next morning, there was a better knife on the kitchen counter. A proper chef's knife, expensive, clearly from the household's professional collection. Left there deliberately. An offering, in the language of a man who apparently did not make offerings easily. She used the knife, didn't mention it. That felt right. On the 8th day, something happened in the garden that she replayed in her head for a long time afterward. Min-jun had followed her outside during the morning walk. This was new. He'd been watching from the doorway for days, and they were moving along the path between the hedges when her foot caught on an uneven stone. She stumbled, caught herself, said a word she probably shouldn't have said in front of a 4-year-old, and then looked up to find Min-jun watching her with an expression she hadn't seen on his face before. It took her a second to identify it. He was trying not to smile. Yeah, she said. "I know, not graceful." He pressed his lips together hard. His shoulders moved. And in the total silence of the garden, she heard it. Not quite a laugh, more the compressed sound of one, like something pushing at a door that hadn't opened in a long time. She didn't make a big deal of it, didn't crow or exclaim or draw attention to the moment. She just kept walking and let it exist. But when she glanced back at the main building, she saw the edge of a figure behind one of the upper windows. Still. Watching. She looked away first. The 10th day was when the first crack appeared. Not in Min-jun and not in her, but in Kang Jae-hyun himself, in a way he clearly had not anticipated and was not prepared for. She'd been in the library, a room she'd discovered on day 6 that was staggering in its scale, every wall covered floor to ceiling and clearly used by no one, when she heard it. Not in the library. Somewhere close. Through the wall. A sound she couldn't immediately place. Low, controlled, repeating. She stood still and listened and identified it. A man talking to himself. No, not to himself. Reading aloud. Very quietly. A children's book, she realized. She recognized the cadence. She walked out of the library into the adjacent corridor and stopped. Kang was sitting on the floor outside Min-jun's room, back against the wall, knees up, a picture book open in his gloved hands. The door was open 6 inches. He was reading it at a volume she could barely hear, steady and even, like he'd been doing this for a while and had learned that the volume mattered, that loud didn't work, that quiet was the only register that didn't make things worse. He did not see her. She stood there for one moment too many. And then his eyes came up. The expression on his face was something she had no framework for. She was witnessing something he did not allow anyone to witness, and they both knew it, and for 3 full seconds, neither of them moved. Then she turned and walked back into the library and picked up the book she'd been reading as though none of it had happened. 20 minutes later, she heard Min-jun's door close quietly. She stared at the page she wasn't reading and thought about a man in a $3,000 suit sitting on a hallway floor, reading picture books to a child through a 6-inch gap. Thought about what kind of love looked like that. Stubborn and patient and slightly desperate and absolutely private. Thought about how you spent years building walls around yourself and still ended up on the floor outside a 4-year-old's room reading The Very Hungry Caterpillar at barely above a whisper. And she thought, with a discomfort she wasn't ready to examine, that she was starting to understand something about Kang Jae-hyun that she had not expected to understand, and that understanding it was going to make the next several months significantly more complicated. The rain returned that night. She lay in the too-soft bed and listened to it against the glass, and tried very hard not to think about the expression on his face when their eyes met in that hallway. She failed. She told herself it meant nothing. That was the first lie she told in that house, and she knew it was a lie while she was telling it, which made it worse. The image stayed with her longer than it should have. Kang on the floor, the book, the 6-inch gap, his face when he realized she was watching. She'd seen a lot in the placements she'd worked. Fathers who paid for everything and felt nothing. Mothers who performed love for social media and forgot their children's teachers' names. She'd learned early that money and care were 2 separate categories that occasionally overlapped, but mostly didn't. What she'd seen in that hallway wasn't performance. There was nobody to perform for. He hadn't known she was there. She made herself stop thinking about it by focusing on Min-jun, which was where her attention belonged, and where it stayed through the next 3 days with an intensity that left her physically tired by evening. Min-jun was changing. It was slow. Nothing dramatic, nothing a stranger would notice, but she noticed because she was trained to notice, and because she paid attention the way some people paid attention to weather, reading the small shifts before the larger ones arrived. He was making eye contact more. Not sustained, not yet, but the glances were longer. He was eating full portions. He was bringing her objects with a regularity that had shifted from occasional to deliberate, like a language developing its own grammar. He still hadn't spoken. She didn't push. Pushing was the fastest way to lose ground with a child who'd built silence as a shelter. On day 13, she did something that made 3 members of the household staff visibly uncomfortable. She put music on in the main sitting room. Not loud, just present. Something instrumental. Jazz she'd downloaded before leaving Atlanta because she couldn't function without music in the background. Han appeared in the doorway within 4 minutes. "Mr. Kang prefers quiet," the woman said. Not unkindly, carefully. "Is he home right now?" "He is in his office." "Has he said anything about the music specifically?" A pause. "No." Then let's see what happens." She kept her voice pleasant. "If he asks me to turn it off, I will." Han left. The music stayed. Min-jun, who had been sitting in the far corner of the room engaged with a puzzle, slowly migrated over the next 20 minutes until he was approximately 4 feet from the speaker. He sat with his puzzle and the music moved around him, and his shoulders were the loosest she'd ever seen them. Kong did not come down to complain about the music. But at some point during the afternoon, she walked past his office door and heard, very faintly, the same track playing inside. He had found the playlist on the shared household network and put it on at low volume without saying a word about it to anyone. She stood in the corridor for a moment and then kept walking. Day 15 was the day the outside world arrived and reminded her where she was. She'd known intellectually the whole time what Kang Jae-hyun was. She wasn't stupid and she wasn't naive, and Director Yoon's careful language in their initial call had told her enough to understand that she was working in a household that did not operate by ordinary rules. The level of security around the property, the guards she never saw directly but whose presence she felt, the cameras whose positions she'd mapped out of professional habit, the way certain conversations stopped when she entered rooms. None of it was ambiguous. She had chosen not to examine it too closely because Min-jun needed her, and she needed the money. And she was capable of living with moral complexity because her life had never offered her the option of avoiding it. But on day 15, 2 men arrived at the estate. She saw them from the garden, being escorted in through the main entrance by Park, the driver, who wore a different expression than usual, tighter, alert. The men were Korean, both of them, wearing suits that were slightly too formal for a daytime visit. One of them was talking on a phone and not looking where he was walking, which she recognized as the specific arrogance of men who were accustomed to other people moving out of their way. She brought Min-jun inside through the side entrance. He'd been watching the men too, she realized, with the particular stillness he used when something registered as threatening. "Let's go to the kitchen," she said quietly. "I'll make hot chocolate." He went without resistance. She kept him in the kitchen for an hour. Through the wall, she could hear voices. Not words, just the texture of a tense conversation, the rises and falls of men deciding something. At one point, something struck a surface hard enough that she heard it clearly, and Min-jun's head came up sharply. She moved without thinking and sat beside him on his side of the table, close but not pressing, and made her own posture deliberately relaxed. "That's just grown-ups being loud," she said. Not quite a lie. Not quite the truth. Min-jun looked at her. Then he looked at the doorway. Then he reached across the table and put his hand very briefly over hers. 1 second, maybe 2, before pulling it back. She kept her face completely neutral because she understood what that gesture cost him. She didn't remark on it. She poured the hot chocolate and told him the only Korean word she'd learned that week, which was the word for delicious, and she said it wrong enough that his lips pressed together in that way they did. The men left 20 minutes later. She heard the cars on the drive. She did not find out until much later what that meeting was about. But she remembered the sound of something striking a surface and Min-jun's head coming up, and she filed it away in the part of her that tracked things she didn't yet understand. She found Kong in the kitchen at 11 that night. She'd come down for water. She always needed water after a long day, her body's most consistent demand. And there he was, standing at the counter with a glass of something that wasn't water, still in his suit from the day. Though the jacket was gone, the gloves still on. A folder open in front of him that he closed the moment she came through the door, which told her everything she needed to know about the folder. They stood in the kitchen. She crossed to the cabinet for a glass, filled it at the sink. Took her time. "How is he?" Kong said. Not a greeting. Direct. The way everything he said was direct. "Better than this morning." She drank. The noise earlier upset him. He settled after about an hour. Something moved across his face. He heard. "Kids hear everything. The walls don't matter." A pause. He picked up his glass, didn't drink, set it down. His jaw worked slightly, the way it did when he was running calculations. "I'll ensure future meetings are conducted elsewhere." "That would help." She lowered her glass. "Is this going to be a regular thing? People coming here?" "This property is my primary residence. Business is sometimes conducted here." "Okay, I'm not asking you to change your life. I'm asking because he needs predictability, and if I know something is coming, I can prepare him for it. I can't prepare him for surprises." He looked at her for a moment. The kitchen light was overhead and direct, and it caught the angles of his face without mercy, and she noticed for the first time a thin scar along his left jaw. Faint, old, the kind that had stopped being visible except in certain lighting. She looked away from it quickly. "The meetings are not regular," he said. "Today was unusual." "All right." She started to leave, got to the doorway. Miss Brooks? His voice didn't change register, but it stopped her. She turned. He was still standing at the counter, but his posture had shifted by a degree she couldn't quite name, something slightly less armored. You sat with him, after. Yes. He permitted it. He did more than permit it. She watched his face carefully. He's trying to tell you he's still here, Mr. Kang. He just doesn't have the words yet, or he doesn't trust that using them is safe. She paused. He watches you, more than you probably realize. His hand on the counter was very still. I'm aware. Are you? She didn't mean it to sound like a challenge. It came out that way anyway. She held his gaze. Because what I've seen is a man who cares very much about that kid and has no idea how to show it in a way the kid can receive. And what he needs isn't expensive toys or structured therapy sessions. He needs someone to sit on the floor with him. Just sit. No agenda. Kong said nothing, but the muscle in his jaw moved. You did it, she said more quietly. I saw you, outside his door. The silence that followed was different from the other silences in that house. It had weight. He didn't look away from her, and she didn't look away from him, and something passed between them in that kitchen that she would have been much more comfortable ignoring. That wasn't meant to be seen, he said finally. I know. She held his gaze one beat longer than she should have. Good night, Mr. Kang. She left, went upstairs, pressed her back against her bedroom door, and breathed slowly, and told herself, very firmly, that she was here for Minjun and the paycheck and Naomi's treatment, and that was where her focus would remain, and she was going to sleep now. She lay awake for 2 hours. On day 18, she made her first real mistake. It wasn't dramatic. That was the thing about mistakes in close quarters. They weren't usually dramatic. They were small and human, and they happened in the gap between what you intended and what you actually did. Minjun had found the photograph. She'd kept it in the side pocket of her bag. A picture of her and Naomi from 2 summers ago, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. Amar's arm around her sister's thin shoulders. She hadn't taken it out since arriving. She'd meant it as comfort for low moments, a private thing. Somehow, she still wasn't sure of the exact sequence of events. It had fallen out when her bag tipped over in the sitting room, and Minjun had picked it up before she noticed. He was holding it when she came back into the room, staring at it with that focused intensity he brought to things that genuinely interested him. That's my sister, she said, sitting down near him. Her name is Naomi. He looked at the photo, looked at Amara, back at the photo. She's sick right now, Amara said, and her voice came out steady, which she was proud of. That's part of why I'm here, so I can help pay for her medicine. Minjun's brow furrowed in that way it did when he was working through something. He held the photo out to her carefully, both hands, like he was returning something important. She took it. Thank you. He reached into the pocket of his small cardigan and produced the red toy car and placed it in her hand next to the photograph. His face was very serious, her throat closed. She breathed through it. Thank you, she said again, same quiet register. I'll take good care of it. This was not the mistake. The mistake came approximately 10 minutes later when Kong appeared in the doorway, home earlier than expected, still in his coat, and saw the car in her hand and understood immediately what it meant. His face went through something she wasn't fast enough to follow. A sequence of reactions, each one controlled before it fully formed. He looked at the car, at Minjun, at Amara. He gave that to you, he said, flat, expressionless. Yes. That car. A pause. She could feel the temperature in the room change. That was his father's. She understood then, all at once and too late, what she was holding. The weight of the small red car shifted in her hand completely. Minjun was looking between them with those watchful eyes. She held the car out toward Kong. Then it should... No. The word came out short, controlled. He looked at Minjun, not at her. If he gave it to you, it was his choice to make. He left the room. She sat with the car in her hand and tried to understand what she'd walked into the middle of, and knew she was only seeing the edges of something much larger and much older and much more painful than a toy car. She found out about the accident 3 days later. Not from Kang, from Han, who told her in the measured way of someone who had decided certain information was operationally necessary. Min-jun's parents, 14 months ago. A mountain road, a car, a collision that the official reports described as an accident. Han's voice when she said the word accident carried a specific kind of flatness that was not flatness at all, and Amara understood that the word was being used the way certain words were used when the truth was something too large and too dangerous to say directly. Min-jun had been in the car. He had not been hurt physically. He had not spoken since. He was awake, Han said. During. Amara sat with that for a moment. And Mr. Kong. He arrived afterward, Han's hands folded together. He was the one who carried Min-jun out. She thought about a man driving up a mountain road and finding. She stopped herself. Didn't let herself finish the image. The people responsible, she said carefully. Han's expression didn't change. They have been addressed. She didn't ask what that meant. She understood what it meant. What she understood more clearly now was what she was seeing in Kong. Not just grief, not just guilt, but the specific weight of a man who believed the danger that killed his brother had come from within his own world, who had built his nephew into a fortress room and hired strangers to provide the warmth. He didn't trust himself to provide because he was terrified, she thought, that loving something too visibly would make it a target. She thought about that for the rest of the evening and into the night, and it changed something in the way she looked at him the next morning when they passed in the hallway. He nodded. She nodded. They moved in opposite directions. But she was looking at him differently now, and she suspected, from the slight tightening around his eyes, that he knew it. Day 22 was when everything started to fracture. She was in the garden with Min-jun when she heard raised voices from the main building, genuinely raised, not the contained tension of the meeting 2 weeks ago. One of them was Kang. She didn't know the other. The language was Korean, but the emotional content was legible across any language barrier. Anger, accusation, something that sounded like desperation pushed through clenched teeth. Min-jun stopped moving. She put her hand gently on his back, between the shoulder blades, the lightest possible contact, and turned him toward the far end of the garden. Let's see if those beetles are still under that rock we found yesterday. He went. She kept her hand off him after that initial redirect, let him move freely, kept her own breathing slow and deliberate because children felt the anxiety of adults through the air like a pressure change. The voices stopped after 7 minutes. 12 minutes after that, Kang appeared at the garden entrance. He had his coat on and his gloves, and his face was the most sealed she had ever seen it. And she recognized that particular sealing, the one that happened after something had cost a person significantly and they were refusing to let the cost show. He looked at Min-jun first. The boy had found his beetles and was crouched over them with focused attention. Then he looked at Amara. I need to leave for 2 days, he said. Business. All right. The staff have instructions. Park will be on the property. We'll be fine. He was already turning. She spoke before she'd decided to. Is it safe? Wherever you're going. He turned back slowly. The expression on his face was one she hadn't seen before. Something between surprise and something else. Something that didn't quite have a name. That is not a question most people ask me, he said. I'm asking because if something happens to you, it doesn't just affect you, it affects him. She nodded toward Min-jun, kept her voice even, practical. He's just starting to open up. Another loss at this point would... She stopped, made herself say it plainly. Would probably close him off for good. The silence stretched. Kong looked at Min-jun. The boy was still crouched over the rock, completely absorbed. I will be careful, he said. Okay. Miss Brooks? She met his eyes. Thank you, he said. The 2 words came out slightly rough around the edges, like they'd had to get past something to reach the air. She nodded. He left. She stood in the garden and watched Min-jun examine his beetles and thought about the look on Kong's face. That unguarded split second when she'd asked if he was going somewhere safe, like nobody had asked him that in so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone ask. She did not analyze that feeling. She was very careful not to analyze it. He came back on the evening of the 2nd day. She heard the car on the drive from Min-jun's room, where she was finishing their nightly quiet time. She registered his return, noted it, and continued with what she was doing. What she did not register, because she had no way of knowing, was who else arrived on that same drive, in a different car, 40 minutes later. She found out the next morning from Han, whose face carried the news before her words did. There was an incident, Han said carefully. Last night, Mr. Kong's second vehicle, on the mountain road. Amara went still. What kind of incident? The car was run off the road. The driver was not seriously injured. A pause. It is believed this was a message, directed at Mr. Kong specifically. A message from who? Han's hands folded together, the same gesture as before. There are parties who have long-standing issues with Mr. Kang's operations. The belief is that these parties have been gathering intelligence about the household. The word household landed differently than it might have a month ago. Amara looked at Han directly. About Min Jun. Possibly. About me. Han's expression didn't change, but her eyes did, marginally. It is possible that recent changes in the household's atmosphere have become visible to outside parties. Changes they believe indicate something worth targeting. Amara sat down. She thought about what she was inside this house. Not a nanny, not entirely. Or not only that. She thought about Naomi's medical bills and the signed contract and the months still ahead of her and the red car currently sitting on her dresser upstairs. She thought about Minjun's face that morning when she'd walked into the kitchen and he'd looked up from his cereal with something that was almost a greeting. She thought about a man sitting on the floor outside a child's room reading a picture book to a 6-inch gap. She thought about someone running a car off a mountain road. Han was watching her. Does Mr. Kong know I know? Amara asked. Not yet. Does he know they've been watching the household? Han's expression answered before she did. Then why are you telling me? Amara asked quietly. Han held her gaze steadily. Because you are the thing that has changed, Miss Brooks. In this house. In that child. In Mr. Kang. A pause. And people who want to damage Mr. Kang are very good at identifying what has changed. Amara sat in the silence of that and felt something shift inside her chest. Not quite fear, not quite anger, but something in the space where they overlapped. She thought about leaving. For exactly 11 seconds, she thought about packing her bag and calling Director Yoon and getting on a plane back to Atlanta, where she understood the dangers and could see them coming. Then she thought about Min Jun, crouched over his beetles with absolute focus, and the car he'd pressed into her hands with both of his, and the sound she'd heard at 3 in the morning that had made her walk down a dark hallway without making a decision to do it. She stood up. "Where is Mr. Kong right now?" she said. "His office. He has been there since last night." She walked to the door and then stopped. "Han." The woman looked at her. How many of those 6 nannies left because the atmosphere was difficult? And how many left because someone made them feel it would be better if they did? Han was quiet for long enough that the quiet was its own answer. Amara nodded once. She walked out of the room and down the corridor toward Kong's office and raised her hand to knock. And the door opened before she could make contact because he had heard her coming. Because of course he had. Because a man like Kang Jae-hyun always heard things coming. And they stood facing each other in the open doorway. He looked like he hadn't slept. The gloves were on. His face was that sealed thing again, but differently sealed than before. Not controlled exactly, but braced, like he was waiting for something specific and already didn't want it. "You were going to tell me," she said. Not a question. A muscle moved in his jaw. "Today." "Yes." "And you were going to offer to terminate my contract, pay the remainder and send me home." The silence confirmed it. "No," she said flatly. He stared at her. "Miss Brooks." "No." She kept her voice steady and direct, the same register she used when she was not going to negotiate. "I am not leaving that child because someone ran a car off a road. I am not leaving because things are complicated. I told you in the first hour I was in this house. Leaving is not in my nature. I meant it." "You don't understand the full—" "I understand enough." She looked at him without flinching. "I understand that people are watching this house because something changed here. I understand that you think removing me is the way to protect Min Jun. And I understand that if you do that, if you send me home, he will not just lose a nanny. He will understand, on some level that he can't put words to, that the people he starts to trust disappear." Her voice stayed even by effort that she felt in her chest. "And he will stop opening doors. For a very long time." Kong stood completely still. Something behind his eyes was moving. She could see it even with everything else sealed. "Staying puts you in danger," he said. I know. The people watching this house are not. He stopped, restarted. They do not make idle threats. The car last night was a demonstration. There will be more. Then make the house safer. She held his gaze. That's something you know how to do. What you don't know how to do, what you haven't been able to do in 14 months, is make that boy feel safe enough to start coming back. And I do. She stopped. Let that sit for one beat. So figure out the security. That's your part. Minjun is mine. The hallway was entirely quiet. Somewhere below them, the household moved through its morning. The smell of breakfast, the distant sound of staff, the ordinary texture of a day. Kong looked at her for a very long time. She did not fill the silence. You're not afraid, he said, finally. I'm terrified, she said honestly. But that's not the same as leaving. He said nothing. She turned and walked back down the corridor and did not look at her hands until she reached the kitchen doorway, where she stopped and pressed them flat against the wall for a moment and breathed. They were shaking. She went in and made breakfast anyway, because Minjun would be awake in 12 minutes and he needed someone steady at the table when he came down. And right now steady was the only thing she knew for certain how to be. She was cracking eggs when she heard footsteps stop outside the kitchen entrance. She did not turn around. A long pause. The footsteps moved away. On the counter beside her cutting board, where there had been nothing a moment before, sat a phone, new, slim, with a piece of paper beneath it bearing 7 digits in a precise handwriting. No note, no explanation, only the numbers and the understanding that they were his. She looked at it for a moment, put it in her pocket, cracked the last egg. The day had already shifted into something neither of them had a word for yet. And somewhere in the upper floors of that silent mountain house, on a road that would be watched now by eyes she couldn't see, the enemy had already decided that Amara Brooks was not an accident. She was the point they intended to press. The eggs were good. That was the stupid thing she kept coming back to later. The eggs were good that morning. Minjun ate the whole plate, and for approximately 40 minutes the world inside that kitchen felt like something survivable. Then Kong walked in. He was dressed for outside, coat, gloves, the particular posture of a man who had made a decision and was not going to discuss it. He looked at Minjun first, the way he always did, that involuntary check, like breathing. Then he looked at Amara. I need an hour, he said. Take what you need. He left through the side entrance. She heard 2 cars on the drive. Minjun was watching the door. He'll be back, she said. She didn't know if it was true. She said it like it was. Minjun picked up his fork and finished his eggs. The hour became 3. She filled them the way she filled all uncertain hours. Movement, routine, the deliberate architecture of an ordinary day. She and Minjun went through his picture books. She attempted 3 words of Korean, mispronounced all of them, and he pressed his lips together in that almost smile that was becoming one of the most important things in her daily life. They found a piece of cardboard in the recycling and made something that was meant to be a boat and became, through a series of structural failures, more of a flat tray with ambitions. She was aware the entire time of the phone in her pocket, 7 digits in precise handwriting. She had not used it. At 11:47, it buzzed with a text from an unsaved number that she knew immediately was him. Back at 2. Keep him inside today. She looked at the message for a moment, typed back, understood. 3 seconds later, the kitchen window, closed the blind. She crossed the kitchen without hurrying, closed the blind, and did not let Minjun see her hands. Kong came back at 2:14. He came through the main entrance and went directly to his office without stopping, which told her the 3 hours had not gone well. She gave him 20 minutes. Then she knocked. Come in. He was at his desk but not working, papers in front of him, untouched, his hands flat on either side of them. He looked like a man who had stopped in the middle of something and not yet decided what came next. She closed the door behind her, stayed near it. What happened? She said. He looked at her steadily. The intelligence I received yesterday about the car. I had it verified this morning. The organization responsible is called SEO. He paused, measured. They have been a secondary concern for several years, a faction that operates in the spaces my organization doesn't occupy. Small, historically opportunistic. Another pause. They are no longer small. How long have they been watching the house? Longer than I knew. His jaw moved. Approximately 6 weeks. She absorbed this. 6 weeks put it at almost exactly when she arrived. They've been watching since I got here. Yes. So they know my routine, Minjun's routine. Yes. They know about Naomi. The pause before he answered was one beat too long. Yes. She felt the floor do something unpleasant under her feet. She breathed through it. What do they know about her specifically? Kong's hands on the desk pressed slightly harder against the surface. It was subtle, the kind of tell that only registered if you were watching for it. Her treatment facility, her schedule, her primary physician. He stopped. Say the rest, Amar said quietly. 2 days ago, before the car incident, a man visited her facility. He represented himself as a pharmaceutical liaison. He spoke with 2 staff members and reviewed what. He was given access to her file. Before the facility identified the discrepancy in his credentials and removed him. The room was very quiet. Amara could hear her own pulse in her ears. He didn't touch her, Kong said. She is safe. I have had people placed at the facility since last night. She is not aware of it. You put people at my sister's hospital without telling me. I made a decision based on incomplete information, and I should have, without telling me. Her voice came out flat. Not angry, flatter than anger. Someone accessed my sister's medical file and you knew and you didn't tell me. I found out at 8 this morning. I needed to verify it before... Before what? Before you decided whether I needed to know? Whether it was relevant to me? She stopped herself, breathed, made herself stay in the room when everything in her body wanted to move. Is she actually safe? Yes. I give you my word. She looked at him. He held her gaze without moving, without the slight evasions that most people used when they were saying something they half believed. He meant it. She understood that he meant it, and she also understood that his word in this context carried a specific weight that ordinary promises didn't. What do they want? She said. Kong was quiet for a moment. Then, me. Specifically, they want me to withdraw from 3 port operations along the western coast. They believe that pressure on what they perceive as my vulnerabilities will accelerate that withdrawal. He looked at his hands. They believe you are the most significant of those vulnerabilities. She waited. They are correct, he said. It came out without inflection, like a fact about weather. I was looking at his hands when he said it. And then he looked up at her, and the combination of that admission and that direct eye contact was one of the most uncomfortable things she had encountered in that house. Which is why the safest option remains, don't. She said it before he finished. Don't offer to send me home again. We settled that this morning. This morning you didn't know about your sister's file. It doesn't change my answer. She heard herself say it and understood that it was true, which was its own particular problem. It changes my understanding of what I'm dealing with. It doesn't change what I decide to do with that understanding. She crossed her arms, not defensive, more like something to do with her hands. Tell me what you need from me. In practical terms. What does staying look like from a security standpoint? He stared at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his face that she was beginning to be able to read. Not fully, not yet, but enough. Different routines, he said. Nothing predictable. Minjun does not leave the property until further notice. He paused. And I need access to your phone, the one you arrived with, not the one I gave you, your personal device. Why? Because the CO organization obtained information about your sister's facility that was specific enough to suggest a source beyond passive observation. The facility's name and her schedule are the kind of details that live on a personal device. He held her gaze. I need to determine if there is a compromise. She pulled her Atlanta phone from her other pocket, held it for a moment, handed it across the desk. He took it carefully, not quite touching her fingers in the transfer. I'll need 2 hours, he said. Okay. She left, went to find Minjun, kept her face arranged in an expression that would not alarm him. She did not tell him what was happening. He was 4. There was no version of this information that was appropriate for a 4-year-old, and so she sat with him on the floor of the sitting room and built a tower out of blocks and knocked it down and built it again, and she kept her breathing slow and her voice light, and inside she was doing the relentless arithmetic of fear, calculating distances, durations, possibilities, the specific logistics of what it meant to be a target in a house you didn't entirely understand. Naomi, She kept arriving back at Naomi. Safe, Kong had said. I give you my word. She believed him in the way she was beginning to believe most things he said. Not blindly, not because she'd forgotten who and what he was, but because she'd spent enough time watching him to understand that he operated by a code that was brutal in some directions and absolute in others. And one of the absolutes was that he did not say things he didn't mean. She was so far from Atlanta. She was so far from everything she understood. The tower fell. Minjun looked at it. He looked at her. Then with complete deliberateness, he began rebuilding it himself, picking up each block, placing it, making small corrections. She watched him work. He was so careful, so serious about the placement of each piece. She thought about what Han had told her. He was awake, during, and she thought about what it did to a small person to witness something irreversible and to have no language for it, no container, and so to carry it in silence because silence was the only option that didn't break you further. She thought about a man reading a picture book to a 6-inch gap. The tower reached 8 blocks before it fell again. Minjun looked at the pieces on the floor, looked at Amara. Then he picked up 1 block and held it out to her. His eyes were very direct. It was an instruction, your turn. She took the block, placed it. He placed the next one. They built it together. What? Kong knocked on the sitting room door frame at 4:15. Minjun looked at him. Something passed between uncle and nephew in the specific wordless language they'd developed. A glance held 1 beat longer than a glance needed to be, a slight shift in Minjun's posture that was not quite relaxed and not quite tense, but something in between, some adjusted calibration. Kong looked at Amara. Can I have a minute? She ruffled Minjun's hair lightly. He allowed this now, had allowed it for a week, and followed Kong into the corridor. He handed her the Atlanta phone. His face was very carefully arranged. Tell me, she said. The device itself is clean, no external compromise. He stopped. But your email. He held her gaze. You received a message 6 weeks ago. From the placement agency. A follow-up regarding your contract, requesting confirmation of several personal details, including your sister's treatment facility, and your response confirmed them. She remembered the email. She'd thought it was routine. It had looked routine. Same sender address, same formatting, same language as every other message she'd received from the agency. It wasn't from the agency, she said. No. He paused. It was a precise imitation, constructed specifically to obtain that information from you before your arrival. She was quiet for a moment. So they targeted me before I even got here. They targeted the position. They knew the household was seeking a nanny. They were prepared for whoever was hired. A pause. The email was sent within 4 hours of Director Yoon contacting you. 4 hours. Someone inside the placement process, or watching it. Someone who had been monitoring Kong's household operations closely enough to know when a new candidate was contacted. Is Yoon? Yoon is not compromised. I verified it. Kong's voice was flat and certain. The breach occurred at the registry level, a data access point that has since been closed. She leaned against the wall. Just for a second. Let it hold her weight. They've been 4 steps ahead this whole time. In that respect, yes. She looked at the ceiling, thought about the email, her own careful response, the ordinary-looking message she'd trusted because she'd been sitting in a hospital waiting room with $43 in her account and no margin for suspicion. She thought about how easy it was to exploit a person who was already desperate, how you didn't need to break through their defenses if you approached from the direction of their hope. They used Naomi, she said. They used the fact that I needed this job. They used the fact that I'd answer any routine-looking question from the agency because I couldn't afford not to. Kong said nothing. He didn't have to. They both understood what that meant. So what now? She said. Now. He stopped. A different quality of silence. She looked at him and saw something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not the controlled blankness, not the armored professionalism, but something underneath it that was cracking along a line she didn't yet know the shape of. He reached into his jacket, placed a photograph on the hall table between them. It was a surveillance still, grainy, taken from a distance, clearly from a camera positioned above. It showed the exterior of the estate, the main gate, and standing outside it, in the rain, looking directly at the camera as though he knew exactly where it was a man she didn't recognize. Korean, 50s, heavy through the shoulders. He wore an ordinary coat. He looked, from the outside, like nothing. "This was taken this morning," Kong said, "at 6:42, while I was already on the road." He was just standing there? For 11 minutes. Then he walked away. She looked at the photograph. The man's gaze at the camera was completely flat, not threatening. That was the thing that made her skin pull tight. Not theatrical, just informational. A man standing in front of a gate in the rain, letting himself be seen, communicating something very specific through the act of visibility itself. "We are here. We know you are here. We are not afraid of your cameras." "Who is he?" she said. Kong picked up the photograph. "His name is Seo Dong-hyun. He is the head of the SEO organization." A pause. "He was also the man who ordered the car that killed my brother and his wife." The hallway went very quiet. She looked at Kong's hands, the gloved hands, flat and still at his sides, and thought about what it cost a man like this to stand in a corridor and say that name without his voice changing. "He came here himself," she said. "Yes. That's not a message, that's a statement." She understood it the way she understood certain things, instinctively, in the body before the mind caught up. He's telling you this is personal, that he's running it personally. "Yes." Kong's voice was very even, the way something was even when it was being held extremely still by force. "Why now?" she said. "The ports, this has been building for how long?" 2 years, slowly. He folded the photograph. "The change in timeline corresponds with the change in the household, with you." She absorbed that. "He thinks you're distracted. He thinks I have something worth taking." A pause, and in the pause she could feel the shape of what he wasn't saying. "He is not wrong." She looked at him. He looked at her. In the corridor of that cold, expensive, silent house, with the sounds of Min-jun moving blocks around in the sitting room behind them, Kang Jae-hyun said the most exposed thing she'd heard him say since she arrived. "He is not wrong," and let it sit there between them without qualification or retreat. She didn't know what to do with it. She filed it away with the other things she didn't know what to do with and took a breath. "Okay," she said. "So he thinks attacking through me, through Min-jun, is the fastest way to break your position." "Yes." "Then we can't give him a clear angle on either of us. That is the current—" A sound stopped him. Not a loud sound, not an alarm. A soft sound from the direction of the kitchen. A door, she thought, but not the right door. The side door, the one the staff used for deliveries, which was not a door that should be opening at 4:30 in the afternoon because delivery windows closed at 2. Kong moved before she finished the thought. 3 steps to the sitting room entrance, checking Min-jun. Present, sitting, looking up with wide eyes at the shift in the air. Kong said something in Korean, low and rapid, and Min-jun rose from the floor immediately and went to the interior corner of the room without a word, sat, made himself small. A rehearsed movement. She felt sick seeing it, the evidence of a child who had been drilled on exactly this protocol. Kong looked at Amara. Pointed. Corridor, upstairs, with him. She went. 3 of his people materialized from doors she hadn't known contained people. She filed that away too. They moved toward the kitchen without sound, and Kong moved her up the staircase with one hand barely touching her shoulder, just directional pressure. And at the top of the stairs he stopped her. "Stay here," he said. "Both of you." Min-jun is... Park is with him. Stay here. He went back down. She stood at the top of the stairs with her hand tight on the banister and listened. For approximately 90 seconds, nothing audible happened. Then there were voices, Kong's, flat and sharp, and another voice, male, responding in Korean. Not afraid. Conversational, almost. Like someone who had walked through that door fully prepared for what they'd find. Then silence again. Long enough that her grip on the banister tightened. Kong appeared at the bottom of the stairs. He looked up at her and something in his face was different. Not the controlled blankness, something older and tighter underneath it. "Come down," he said. She came down. He led her to the kitchen entrance and stopped her at the doorway. The man from the photograph was not in the kitchen, but one of Kong's people was, standing beside the counter, and on the counter was a phone that did not belong to anyone in the household. A cheap device, a burner, the kind designed to be discarded. The screen was lit. On it was a photograph. She looked at it and felt the bottom drop out of her chest. It was Naomi. Not a file photo, not a record. A real-time photograph taken through a window. Naomi in her hospital bed, profile, the afternoon light angling across her face. Taken recently enough that the angle of the light matched the current time. Below the photograph, a single line of text in English. She looks comfortable. For now. Amara's hand came up and pressed flat against the door frame. She needed something solid. The kitchen tile was very bright under the lights, and the phone on the counter was very small, and Kang was standing 2 feet to her left, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the contained stillness of a man holding something very dangerous, very carefully. They have someone at the facility, she said. Her voice came out flat. They bypassed my people. His voice was equally flat. Someone already inside, a staff member or patient contact. This was placed in position before I had coverage there. He stopped. This was already arranged when I found out this morning. They wanted me to find out. They wanted me to place people there so I would see this and understand that my people did not reach there first. She looked at the photograph of her sister, Naomi's profile, her thin shoulders, the IV line, the ordinary afternoon light. What do they want? She said. Me to remove my operation from the Western ports, completely. Within 72 hours. He paused. And you to leave this household, immediately, permanently. She said nothing. They believe, Kong continued, his voice now at a level she had to concentrate to hear, that I will prioritize your safety, that I will send you away and reduce my position to protect you, that the leverage they have identified in you will work precisely because... He stopped. A brief, almost invisible stop. Because it is real. She turned her head and looked at him. He was looking at the phone on the counter. Is that what you're going to do? She said. He was quiet for a long moment. His gloved hands were at his sides, pressed flat against his thighs, and she recognized it now as the posture of a man managing something at the extreme edge of his management capacity. If I concede to this, he said finally, we both know it does not end here. Organizations like CO do not stop when leverage works. They escalate. They confirm the leverage and then they own it permanently. A pause. Sending you away does not make you safe. It makes you a permanent tool. I know. And if you stay, I know that too. He turned to look at her then, full, direct, the way he looked at things he was trying to understand completely. She held it. They will come here, he said, directly. This, he gestured at the phone. This is the last stage before direct engagement. I know how Seo Dong-hyun operates. This is not a warning. This is preparation. He let that settle. When they come here, it will not be 2 men at a gate. It will be coordinated. They will try to take something to use, or they will try to destroy something I cannot replace. She thought about Min-jun in the corner of the sitting room, making himself small, and the way that was a rehearsed movement, and everything that meant. She thought about Naomi's profile in afternoon light through a hospital window. Then we need to be ready before they come, she said. His jaw tightened. Amara. It was the first time he'd used her name, not Miss Brooks. Her name, with the specific weight of someone who had been careful not to use it, and then stopped being careful. She felt it land. Let it. Tell me what you need, she said. From me. Specifically. Not what you need me to do to be safe, what you need from me to get through this. Those are different questions. He looked at her for a long time. The kitchen was very bright. The phone on the counter was very small. Something shifted in his face. Not all the way, not the full opening of something sealed, but a crack, real and narrow and clearly involuntary. I need you to trust me, he said, even when I can't explain every decision, even when what I'm doing looks like the wrong thing. A pause. The words came out rough at the edges, like they'd been stored somewhere they didn't quite fit. I am not practiced at protecting something He stopped again. She waited. He didn't finish it. She understood that he couldn't, and she understood what the unfinished sentence contained. Okay, she said. Okay. But I need the same thing from you. She held his gaze. When something involves Min-jun or my sister, you tell me. Before you've decided what I should know, you tell me everything and you let me decide. He held her gaze for a long beat. Yes, he said. She nodded, looked at the phone one more time. Get that out of my kitchen. She walked out, went upstairs to change into clothes she could move in, because she understood now with complete clarity that the time for standing still in this house was over, and whatever was coming down that mountain road was coming whether they were ready or not. And the only question left was what shape they'd be in when it arrived. She was pulling on her second shoe when the lights went out. Not a flicker, not a gradual dim, a complete, instantaneous blackout. The entire house, every corridor, every room, dropping into an absolute dark that was so total she couldn't see her own hands in front of her face. And from somewhere below her in the blackout, from a direction she couldn't immediately identify, she heard Minjun begin to cry. Not the careful, compressed crying of a child who'd learned to be quiet, but the raw, unguarded sound of a child who was terrified, and her body was moving toward it before she'd made any decision at all. She moved through the dark the way she moved through every hard thing, without elegance, without training, purely on the knowledge that stopping was not an option. Her shoulder hit the doorframe going out of her room. She registered the pain and kept moving. The hallway was absolute black, the kind that had texture, that pressed against the eyes like something physical. She had one hand on the wall and was counting her steps from memory. She'd walked this hallway 80, 90 times in 3 weeks. She knew where the side table was, where the corridor turned, where the carpet runner ended, and the bare floor started. Minjun's crying was below her and to the left. First floor, not the sitting room, further back. The kitchen corridor or beyond it. She found the staircase with her foot, nearly went down it wrong, caught the banister, and took the stairs fast with her hand trailing the rail. Somewhere in the house she heard men moving. Rapid footsteps, voices in Korean, short and clipped, Kong's people coming alive in the dark. A door hit a wall somewhere. Something metallic scraped. Then from outside, through the walls, she heard the first sound that was not the house. Engines. Multiple. Coming up the mountain road fast, not slowing for the curves. She hit the ground floor and turned left and moved toward Minjun's crying, which was coming from the kitchen. And she was halfway down the corridor when her outstretched hand caught fabric, and she grabbed instinctively, and the person she'd grabbed made a short, sharp sound of shock. "It's me." She got it out fast. "It's Amara." "Who is this?" "Park." His breathing was ragged. He had something in his hand. She felt the shape of it when her wrist grazed his arm, the unmistakable weight and geometry of a firearm. "Miss Brooks, you need to go back." "Where is he, Minjun? Where?" "Kitchen. He's in the kitchen. I was moving him." She pushed past Park and covered the remaining distance to the kitchen doorway and dropped to her knees when she felt the floor change to tile, sweeping her hands in a low arc. Her right hand found a small shoulder. "Hey." She made her voice low and completely steady by the force of everything she had. "Hey, I'm here, it's me, I've got you." Minjun grabbed her with both hands, grabbed her arm, her cardigan, his fingers twisted in the fabric with a strength that surprised her, that desperate grip of a child who needed something solid and was not going to let it go. "Okay," she said. "Okay, I've got you. I've got you." She pulled him against her body, his face against her neck, his whole small frame shaking, and she stayed low and moved them both to the interior wall. Away from the windows, away from the exterior, her back to solid stone, Minjun pressed between her and the wall with her arms around him. She heard the engine stop outside. Kong's voice cut through the dark from somewhere in the main corridor. Not loud, controlled below a certain register, snapping out instructions in Korean so fast she caught only the rhythm. Organized. He was organizing something, boots on the floor above her. A door somewhere slammed. Then the first impact hit the exterior of the building. Not an explosion, something more deliberate. The front gate. She heard the metal of it give under sustained force, a mechanical groan that traveled through the stone walls of the house, and Minjun's grip on her cardigan tightened until she felt the seams pulling. "I've got you," she said into his hair. "I've got you. Don't let go." She heard Kong somewhere to her left now, closer than she expected, moving fast, and then his voice, directed at her specifically, cutting through everything else. "Amara, the interior room, now." "He's shaking too hard to carry him." She didn't argue. She lifted Minjun, all 38 pounds of him, his legs wrapping around her waist, face still buried against her shoulder. and stood. Kong's hand found her upper arm in the dark. Not grabbing, directional, the same pressure as on the stairs the night before, and moved her forward. They went through the kitchen, through a door she hadn't known was there, into a corridor she hadn't known existed, narrower, colder. The floor was stone, not carpet, not tile. Utility space, she thought, service corridor. Kong moved them through it without hesitation, from memory or from the small tactical light he'd clicked on, keeping the beam low and close. Behind them, through walls and floors, she heard the front entrance give. The interior room turned out to be below the main floor, a reinforced space she had no adequate word for that was not a panic room in the cinematic sense, but was clearly designed for exactly this use. Stone walls, low ceiling, emergency lighting coming from strips near the floor that cast the room in a dim red that made everything look like the inside of something living. 3 folding chairs, a first aid kit on the wall, a landline telephone, a second door on the opposite wall that she suspected led out. Kong put her and Minjun in Shin and turned to go. No! Minjun made a sound, not a word, not quite, but a sound with clear intent, and both Amara and Kong stopped. The boy was looking at Kong, still shaking, still holding Amara's cardigan in both fists, but looking directly at Kong with those dark, weighted eyes and making the sound again, a compressed, urgent syllable that was not quite speech and was not quite not speech. Kong went completely still. Go, Amara said quietly. He knows you're coming back. She didn't know if that was true. She said it like it was, the same way she'd said it this morning in the kitchen, and Kang looked at her, and the second door behind him opened and one of his men came through it and said something low and fast, and Kong looked at Minjun one last time, a look that lasted less than 2 seconds and contained more than most conversations, and went. The door closed. The room hummed with the sound of its own insulation and Minjun's uneven breathing and Amara's heartbeat, which she could hear in her ears. She sat down on the floor, back against the wall, and kept Minjun against her chest, and breathed slowly and deliberately and let her body be the steadiest thing in the room. She tracked time by Minjun's breathing. When it evened out, when the shaking reduced from full body to intermittent, she estimated 15 minutes had passed. She had no phone. The landline on the wall was for emergency services, and she understood with cold clarity that calling emergency services into this situation was not an option that ended well. She heard sounds above them, not constant, in waves. Impact sounds, the movement of multiple bodies. Once a sound she identified with a lurch as gunfire, muffled by stone and distance, but unmistakable. Minjun's breathing spiked. She tightened her arms. Still here, she said. Just that. His hands were still twisted in her cardigan. She thought about Kong moving through his own house in the dark. Thought about the gloved hands and the sealed face and the way he'd looked at Minjun for less than 2 seconds before he left. She thought about the specific thing a man carried when he'd already lost his brother in a house on a mountain road and was now defending the only thing left. She stopped thinking about it because it was making her hands unsteady, and she could not afford unsteady hands. 22 minutes after the door closed, the second door opened. She was on her feet before she'd decided to stand. Minjun shifted to her left side, her right arm free, completely useless as a defensive measure, but free. The figure in the doorway resolved into Han, whose face in the red emergency light looked carved from something old and difficult. Come, Han said, quickly. The east corridor is clear. Kong, he is handling the main floor. You need to move. Amara looked at the door they'd come through, looked at Han. Minjun made the sound again, that almost word, urgent and directional, and she realized he was looking at Han too, and she understood that Minjun had known Han for 14 months, which was longer than he'd known her. She moved. They went through the second door. The east corridor opened into what turned out to be a garage, functional, not decorative, housing 3 vehicles and smelling of oil and stone. Han moved them to the far wall and stopped behind the largest vehicle, a black SUV that blocked them from the main garage door. Stay below the door line, Han said, and crouched, and Amara followed, Minjun still against her with his face now turned outward, watching. His shaking had reduced to a tremor. How many are in the house? Amara said. 12 entered through the main gate. 4 came over the north wall. Han's voice was completely even, professional. Mr. Kang has 9 personnel inside, 6 more arriving in 11 minutes from the secondary location. Is he... She stopped, started differently. Is he hurt? Han's eyes came to her face. The red emergency light had given way to the garage's own dim backup power, a sickly yellow. I don't have information on that. But he's still... Yes. Last contact 4 minutes ago. Amara breathed. Minjun's hand found hers in the dark and held on, and she held back without thinking, and the smallness of his hand in hers was the most grounding thing she'd felt since the lights went out. They waited. She counted her own heartbeats. It was something she'd done since childhood, in waiting rooms, in uncertain silences, in the space before results of things she couldn't control. It gave her something to count that wasn't time. At 231, the interior door of the garage opened. The man who came through it was not Kang, not Han's people. She could tell immediately. The posture was wrong. The way he moved the door was wrong. He used his body to push it instead of the handle, which meant his hands were occupied. I was inside the garage before Han registered him. Amara didn't have a weapon. She was crouched behind an SUV holding a 4-year-old's hand. She had none of the things that would have made the next 8 seconds sensible. She shoved Minjun flat to the ground, said, "Stay down," with a ferocity she didn't know her voice could carry. And she rose from behind the SUV and took the 3 steps across the garage floor with the full weight of her body behind them. She wasn't trained. She had no form. What she had was 170 pounds of completely committed forward momentum and the absolute conviction that no one was reaching Minjun through her. She hit the man's shoulder first. Not a tackle, not technical, just mass meeting mass. And it was enough to slam his weapon arm into the vehicle beside them. The gun discharged. The sound in the enclosed garage was physical, a percussion that hit her in the chest and ears simultaneously. Minjun screamed. The man was bigger than her and recovered faster and got his arm around her, and she bit down on his forearm through his jacket sleeve as hard as she could and held it. He made a sound that was not language and yanked, and she went down with him, and Han was there. Han, who moved like someone whose stillness was always a strategic choice. And it was over in the specific, ugly, non-cinematic way that things like this were actually over, which was fast and brutal and left a man on the garage floor not moving. Amara was on her knees. Her ears were ringing from the gunshot. She could feel that her shoulder was wrong. Not broken, she thought, but something pulled hard, a burn that was spreading down her arm. Minjun. She got back to the SUV on her hands and knees. I was on the floor where she'd put him, pressed as small as possible, both hands over his ears, eyes squeezed shut, alive, unharmed. She put her good hand on his back. It's over. That part's over. I've got you. He opened his eyes. He looked at her face and then at her shoulder and back at her face. I'm fine, she said. His mouth opened. She watched it happen, watched the 400 days of silence reach some kind of edge. His face was doing something enormous and entirely visible. He did not speak, but he pressed his forehead against her shoulder, the hurt one, which made her inhale sharply, and held it there. And the intentionality of that gesture was so complete that it was its own kind of language. She put her arm around him and stayed on the garage floor and breathed. Kang came through the interior door 6 minutes later. He saw her on the floor first. Crossed the garage. In the time it took her to register his presence and crouched in front of her, both hands coming to her face, still gloved, tilting it up toward the light, assessing. I'm okay, she said. Your shoulder? I'm okay. Check him first. He looked at Minjun, who was still pressed against her side. The boy looked back at his uncle with those dark, ancient eyes. Kang reached out slowly and put his gloved hand against the side of Minjun's face. Minjun leaned into it. Something moved through Kang's face that she had no word for and didn't try to name. Seo, she said, because someone had to come back to it. Is he? Not here. Kang's jaw hardened. This was a secondary team, an advance force. He paused, and the pause carried weight she didn't like. Seo Dong-hyun came to the front gate himself. He was here when it started. Was here, she said carefully. He left before my reinforcements arrived. His voice was completely flat. Deliberately. He wanted me to know he was here, and then he wanted to walk away. She understood what that meant. The same logic as the photograph on the counter, the man standing at the gate in the rain. CO was not trying to win tonight. He was demonstrating capability, demonstrating reach. He was telling Kong, I can come to your house whenever I choose, take whatever I choose, and leave without consequence. He'll come back, she said. Yes. Kong looked at her directly. With everything, this was preparation. Then we can't be here when he does. Kong's eyes shifted fractionally. He hadn't expected that. We can't stay in this house and wait for him to decide the timing, she said. Her shoulder was burning steadily now, a deep, structural heat that she was fairly sure was going to be significantly worse by morning. That gives him every advantage. He sets the when and the where, and we sit inside these walls and become exactly what he wants us to be. Static, predictable, surrounded by a location he's already mapped. Moving Minjun is safer than sitting here. She met his eyes. You know that. You already know that. You've been running calculations since the lights went out. He looked at her for a long moment. His hand was still against the side of Minjun's face. The boy had not moved away from it. There is a location, Kong said carefully. Secondary, underground. I have not used it in 3 years because I did not... He stopped. A slight recalibration. Because there was no reason to go there. It is defensible. It is unknown to sail. How far? 40 minutes by the secondary road. The road is not on any map associated with this property. When can we move? The house is clear now. We can move in 20 minutes. He stood, looked at her shoulder with the specific expression of a man who was not going to say what he was thinking. Han will look at that before we go. It's fine. Han will look at it, he said again, in the tone that was not a request. She wanted to argue. Her shoulder chose that moment to send a message up her neck sharp enough to make her eyes water briefly, and she made an executive decision to let Han look at it. 20 minutes, she said. 18 now. He extended his hand, the gloved hand, the barrier he maintained against the world, and she took it, and he pulled her to her feet with a directness that suggested he'd done this many times for many people and was doing it now without thinking about the fact that he was doing it. She was upright. His hand was still holding hers. 1 second, 2, before he released it. Neither of them looked at the other's face. Minjun stood up between them and reached up and took Kong's hand and Amara's hand separately, one in each of his, and held them. She looked down at the boy. Kong looked down at him. Minjun was looking straight ahead at the door they needed to go through, his jaw set with the peculiar determination of a 4-year-old who had decided something. They went through the door. Han wrapped her shoulder in the utility room off the main corridor with a speed and competence that confirmed several things about Han that Amara had already suspected. Separated, not dislocated. Han's verdict, delivered without sentiment, functional, painful, manageable. You threw yourself at an armed man, Han said. She was winding a compression wrap with precise, even tension. He was between me and Minjun. Yes. A pause. I saw. There was something in Han's voice that was not quite approval, but was adjacent to it. The kind of respect that came from watching someone do something stupid for exactly the right reason. Have you told Mr. Kang how the man got into the garage? Amara said. Han's hands paused for one beat, continued. There is a member of the household staff who was not where they were supposed to be tonight. This is being addressed. Addressed. Yes. She thought about what that meant in this household and decided not to pursue it further. The second location, she said instead. What is it? Han tied off the wrap. Mr. Kong's original base of operations, before the estate. He built this house 8 years ago. Before that, he operated from below ground. A pause. He has not taken anyone there, not in the 3 years since he moved here, not anyone. She absorbed this. Why is he taking us there now? Han stood, looked at her with the steady, evaluating gaze of someone who had been watching something develop with professional attention. I think you understand the answer to that, Miss Brooks. She did. She just wasn't ready to say it out loud, which was probably obvious to anyone paying attention, and Han was definitely paying attention. 12 minutes, Han said, and left. They moved out through the garage in a configuration that Kong clearly directed without needing to explain it. Amara and Minjun in the middle vehicle, Kong in the front vehicle, with 2 of his people, 2 more in the vehicle behind. 6 personnel who weren't in vehicles were staying at the estate for reasons she understood without asking. Minjun sat in the back seat next to her with his seatbelt on, the red car in his hands, and he was not shaking anymore. He was watching the window with an expression of exhausted concentration, like he was memorizing the darkness outside. She was watching him when she felt the vehicle slow unexpectedly. The lead vehicle had stopped. She heard Kong's door open. Then her door opened. Kong, from outside, crouching to her window level, his face tight with something controlled very hard. "There's a vehicle across the road," he said. 40 meters ahead. It wasn't there when my people cleared this route 20 minutes ago." She felt the cold run through her from the neck down. "CO," she said. "Possibly a secondary block. Possibly a message." His jaw was working. "We cannot go forward and we cannot go back to the estate. Third option. There is a trail, on foot. 2 kilometers to a secondary vehicle I keep at the base of the North Ridge." His eyes went to Minjun. He'd have to walk most of it. Minjun had turned from the window. He was looking at Kong with that direct, weighted gaze. He held up the red car. Kong looked at it. Something shifted in his face. "He can do it," Amara said. "Tell me what the 2 kilometers looks like." "Steep at the start, levels out after the first ridge. Dense trees. That's cover, but it's also dark. We have the tactical lights. Use sparingly. Light is visible." "Understood." She was already unbuckling. "Let's go." Kong caught her arm. His hand around her upper arm, careful of the shoulder. "If we encounter anyone on that trail, I know." Amara. There it was again. Her name, in that register, with that weight. "Stay directly behind me. Whatever you see, whatever you hear, you stay behind me and you hold on to him and you do not stop." She looked at him, at the gloved hand on her arm, at the face that was, in this moment, stripped of almost everything that usually covered it. "Okay," she said. "Okay." He released her arm, looked at Minjun. "Ready?" Minjun put the red car in his pocket, nodded. They got out into the mountain dark and moved toward the tree line, and behind them on the road the blocked vehicle's headlights were 2 small cold stars, and ahead of them the ridge rose into black. And somewhere in the dark between here and the North Ridge, the enemy was waiting with the patience of a man who had learned that eventually everything came to him. The trees took them. 1. The first kilometer was a controlled kind of terrible. The trail was narrow and the footing was uneven, and the tactical light stayed off, except for 3-second intervals that Kong used to read the terrain ahead before clicking it dark again. Minjun walked between them, Amara's hand loosely at the back of his collar, not pulling, just present. And he walked without complaint, without sound, his small sneakers finding the ground with a careful deliberateness that made her chest hurt. She was watching the dark between the trees on both sides. Her shoulder was a sustained fire that she'd organized into the background. Not gone, not manageable in any comfortable sense, but background. Her heart was even. Her breathing was even. Her body was doing the thing it did in crisis, narrowing, compressing, dedicating all resources to the immediate moment. Kong stopped. She felt it more than saw it. The change in the air ahead of her, the specific stillness of a person who has heard something. She stopped. Put her hand flat against Minjun's back. 3 seconds. 5, 10. Then Kong moved again, different, faster, angled to the right, a correction that took them off the trail into the trees themselves. And she followed without sound and brought Minjun with her, and they went into the undergrowth, branches against her face and arms, the smell of wet earth and pine. Behind them on the trail, she heard footsteps. Not theirs. She pressed Minjun against the nearest trunk with her body and made herself as small as she was capable of being, and did not breathe. Kong was a foot to her left. She knew by the heat of him in the cold air, invisible in the dark. The footsteps were 2 people, moving steadily, not fast, not searching, moving with the confidence of people who knew where they were going and had decided to arrive there. They passed within 4 meters. She could smell cigarette smoke from one of them. She could hear low voices, Korean, murmuring. They passed. Continued ahead, toward the ridge. She waited until she couldn't hear them. Kong's hand found her elbow in the dark, and he moved them back to the trail. Different angle, further right, and they kept moving. The second kilometer hit on an incline that made her shoulder scream in a way she could no longer entirely organize into the background. She set her jaw and kept pace and kept her hand present at Minjun's back and watched the dark. At the top of the ridge, Kong stopped and crouched, and she crouched beside him. And below them, at the base of the slope, she could see in the faint moonlight a small structure, a shelter, a shack, something built for utility and not observed, and beside it, the dark shape of a vehicle. "That's it," he said, barely sound. She looked down the slope, looked at the structure. Something sat wrong in her stomach. "Kong!" She kept her voice at the same sub-register. "The shelter. The door." He looked. The door was open. In the dark, barely visible. Open, when a shelter kept alone and unused for 3 years would not be open. He went completely still beside her. Minjun was crouched between them, looking at the shelter, and then he turned and looked at Amara with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not fear, not the weighted silence of his grief, but something alert and specific, and she realized he was looking at something behind her, not at the shelter at all. She turned. At the tree line behind them, 15 feet back on the ridge trail, Seo Dong-hyun stood in the dark in his ordinary coat with 3 men behind him. He was not holding a weapon. He didn't need to. The men behind him were holding enough for everyone on the ridge. He looked at Kong with the flat, informational gaze she'd seen in the photograph. The same gaze, the same total absence of urgency, the expression of a man who had been patient for a very long time and was now simply collecting what he'd already decided was his. His eyes moved to Amara, held there for a moment, then to Minjun. "Jae-hyun," he said. His voice was conversational, almost gentle. "It took longer than I expected." Kong's body beside her had gone to a stillness she'd never felt from him. Not the controlled stillness of his ordinary affect, but the stillness of something that has reached the end of its options and knows it. She looked at Minjun between them, at the red car visible in the boy's coat pocket, at Kong's gloved hands at his sides, at the 15 feet between them and Seo, at the drop behind her down the ridge, at the open door of the shelter below. She looked at all of these things in the span of 2 seconds, and she understood, with the particular clarity that came from having no good choices left, that the next 30 seconds were going to require something from her that she had never been required to give before, and that there was no version of the next 30 seconds in which she was the person who stood still and waited for someone else to decide what happened. She looked at Kong. He was already looking at her. She moved first. Not toward Seo, not toward his men. She moved sideways, one sharp step to the right, putting her body between Minjun and the direct line of sight from the 3 armed men. And she crouched, and she said to Minjun in a voice so low it barely disturbed the air, "Run to the shelter, right now. Don't look back." Minjun ran. Seo's eyes tracked the boy for exactly half a second in which Kong moved, and the ridge erupted. She did not see all of it. She was already moving in the opposite direction from Minjun, lateral, toward the tree line to draw attention, and she knew it, and she did it anyway, because 4-year-old legs needed distance, and every eye she pulled toward herself was an eye, not tracking a small boy running down a slope in the dark. She heard the sound of Kong connecting with the nearest armed man. Not a gunshot, something more physical, the percussion of a body hitting ground. And then a gunshot that came from the wrong direction, from below, from the shelter. And she understood that the open door had not been a trap set for them, but a position already occupied by someone on Kong's side who had arrived at the vehicle and waited. She hit the tree line and spun back. The ridge was chaos in the dark. Kong had 2 of Seo's men in the space between them, and she could see him, barely, in the fractional moonlight, moving with the precise, brutal efficiency of someone who had learned long ago that hesitation was the most expensive thing you could afford in a fight. He was not elegant. He was not cinematic. He was fast and he was committed, and he was fighting like a man who had decided that whatever it cost tonight, he was paying it. Seo was not fighting. Seo was standing 15 feet from where he'd been, watching, and his eyes found Amara in the trees with a directness that told her he'd known exactly where she went. He walked toward her. She looked around for anything with weight, found a branch, dead wood, the diameter of her wrist. She picked it up and held it, and it was absurd. She knew it was absurd, but she set her feet and held it. Seo stopped 4 feet from her. He looked at the branch. He looked at her face. Something moved through his expression that was not quite contempt and not quite interest. "You're not what I expected," he said. His English was careful, deliberate, a man who had learned it for professional reasons. He chose well. He didn't choose me, she said. I was hired. That was before. His eyes moved briefly to the ridge where Kong was still fighting, came back. What are you now? She didn't answer that. She tightened her grip on the branch. It doesn't matter, he said, and reached for her. She swung. She connected. Not well, not with anything like technique, but she was aiming for his forearm and she hit it, and he made a sound of pain that was satisfying for the exact duration it took him to redirect. And then his hand was around her wrist, and the branch was gone, and her shoulder, the separated one, was being leveraged at an angle that turned her vision white at the edges. She did not scream. She set her jaw and went with the leverage instead of against it, and threw her weight forward, and they both went down, and she got one knee into his midsection before he got purchase, and reversed her, and she was face down against the ridge dirt with his weight across her back, and her shoulder was a sustained explosion of white. She heard Kong's voice, close, too close. Get off her. The weight left her back. She got her good arm under herself and pushed up and turned in time to see Kong with his forearm across Seo's throat and Seo's back against a tree. And Seo, even now, even in this, was not afraid. His hands were at his sides and his face was the same flat informational expression, and he looked at Kong the way you looked at something inevitable. You can't kill me on this ridge, Seo said. You kill me here, every arrangement I have in place activates. Your assets, your people, the hospital in Atlanta. His eyes moved briefly to Amara, standing with her arm pressed against her body. All of it. Kong's forearm didn't move. His face was completely sealed. I know, he said. Then you know what happens next. You withdraw from the ports. The woman leaves. I know what happens next, Kong said again, and his voice was at a register she hadn't heard before. Not the controlled professionalism, not the almost warmth she'd heard in the kitchen late at night, but something older and quieter and entirely certain of itself. And so do you. He stepped back, took his forearm away. And Amara understood, watching his face, that Kong had not moved back because he'd been persuaded. He'd moved back because this was not where it ended. Seo straightened, adjusted his coat. The flat gaze didn't waver. Two of Kong's people came up the ridge from the shelter, and the three armed men who had been behind Seo were on the ground, and the math on the ridge had changed completely. Seo looked at all of it, looked at Kong, looked at Amara one more time. This isn't finished, he said. No, Kong agreed. It isn't. Seo walked back toward the tree line. Kong's people led him. Amara watched him go and felt sick with the knowledge of why. The arrangements in place, the activated consequences, the hospital in Atlanta, and understood that this was the worst kind of enemy, the kind that built their protection into the harm they intended, so that killing them only accelerated the damage. She stood on the ridge and breathed through the pain in her shoulder and watched the dark take him. Min-jun, she said, in the shelter, safe. Kong was already moving down the slope. Come. Min-jun was sitting on the floor of the shelter with one of Kong's people, a young man, 20s, who had clearly been talking to him in low Korean for the past several minutes, and looked enormously relieved when Kang came through the door. The boy stood when he saw them. He looked at Amara's arm, held against her chest, and his face moved through something complicated. He crossed to her and stood in front of her and reached up very slowly and put both hands around her good hand, the way you held something you were being careful with. She crouched to his level. Her shoulder sent a protest up her neck and she ignored it. I'm okay, she said. You did everything right. You ran. He looked at her for a long moment. His mouth opened. And then, for the first time in 431 days, Min-jun spoke. It was one word. Korean. Soft, almost inaudible, the word pulled up from somewhere it had been buried under weight she couldn't measure. She didn't know the word. She looked at Kong, who was standing in the shelter doorway, and his face was doing something she had never seen it do. Not cracking, not shifting, but opening, visibly and entirely, the way something opens when it has been sealed so long that the opening of it is almost violent. His eyes were bright. He looked at Min-jun, and he said something back, low, just as soft, the same word repeated, and then he crossed the shelter in 3 steps and crouched on the other side of the boy and put his arms around his nephew for the first time that she had ever witnessed, the gloved hands and all, pressing the boy against his chest. And Min-jun let him, and turned his face into his uncle's shoulder, and held on. She stood up slowly and looked at the shelter wall and gave them 30 seconds by not looking at either of them. The young guard beside her was looking at the ceiling and blinking rapidly. "What did he say?" she asked quietly. "The word." The guard cleared his throat. "Safe," he said. He said safe. She looked at the wall for another few seconds, breathed. "Okay," she said, to no one in particular. "Okay." They drove for 40 minutes in the dark and arrived at the secondary location, underground, as Kong had said, accessed through a structure that appeared from outside to be a commercial storage facility on the outskirts of a small mountain town. Below it was something else entirely, reinforced, functional, climate-controlled, with the particular organization of a place that had been built to sustain life for an extended period without contact with the outside world. Amara walked through it at 3 in the morning with Min-jun holding her hand and tried to understand what she was looking at. It was not comfortable, not in the way the estate was, not curated or designed for impression. It was bare and clean and entirely serious, a place where things got decided. Kong showed her a room for Min-jun. Folding cot, a blanket, the necessities. He had one of his people retrieve from a locked cabinet a stuffed toy, a bear, well worn, that she recognized after a moment as the one with the missing ear from the boy's room at the estate. Someone had thought to bring it. Min-jun lay down without protest. He was asleep in under 5 minutes, the bear under his arm, the red car on the floor beside the cot where he could see it. She stood in the doorway and watched him sleep. "The word," she said quietly, not turning around. She knew Kong was behind her. "Has he said anything else?" "No, just the one." A pause. "It's enough." She turned. He was leaning against the opposite wall of the corridor, coat still on, the gloves. He looked like a man who had been standing up through force of decision for approximately 6 hours and was beginning to run the bill on it. "Your shoulder," he said. "I know. There's a medical kit, better than what Han used." "In a minute." She looked at him. "The arrangements CO mentioned, the ones that activate if he's killed." "I'm aware of them." "How long have you known about them?" A slight pause. "Since this morning, when I went out and came back." He met her eyes. "I was trying to determine if there was a way to dissolve them before tonight became what it became." "And?" "There is a way. It requires time and it requires specific information that I am currently obtaining." He said it with the flatness of someone reporting a fact they find unacceptable. SEO has one vulnerability that he has not fully accounted for, a financial architecture that sustains all his arrangements. If it's dismantled correctly, the arrangements collapse without a trigger. How long? 72 hours. Perhaps less. And in the meantime, he knows we're not at the estate and he doesn't know we're here. Correct. So 72 hours in this room? Yes. She looked at the corridor, at the bare walls and the functional lights and the complete underground silence. "I've been in worse places," she said. Something moved in his face. "This isn't what I—" He stopped, started again differently. "When you came to this house, this is not what I intended." "I know." She held his gaze. "What did you intend?" He was quiet for a moment. The corridor was very still. "An arrangement. Professional. A person who could reach Min-jun in the ways I could not. Someone to fill the gap." He looked at the floor. "I did not intend anything else." "And now?" He looked up. The expression on his face was the one from the shelter, the one that had opened involuntarily. Not quite closed again, the edges of it still visible. "Now I am standing in a corridor at 3 in the morning, having put you directly in the path of the most dangerous man I have ever dealt with, and you have a separated shoulder, and you hit him with a piece of wood. It was a reasonable piece of wood." "Amara." She stopped, almost smiling. "I put you in danger," he said. "Specific, direct danger. Not because I wanted to, because I miscalculated how quickly Seo would identify what you—" He stopped again. His jaw worked. "What you had become." "What had I become?" she asked quietly. He looked at her for a long time. She could hear Min-jun breathing in the room behind her, the soft, even rhythm of a sleeping child. She could feel the pain in her shoulder and the exhaustion in her legs and the cold of the underground air, and she stood in all of it and waited. "The reason the house felt different," he said, The reason Minjun spoke. The reason I have spent 3 weeks watching security footage at 5 in the morning. He held her gaze with the particular steadiness of a man who has decided to say a true thing and is going to finish saying it. You are the thing that changed. In that house. In him. In... A pause. In me. The corridor was very quiet. You should sleep, she said finally. He blinked. Almost. Almost. A different expression. That's your response. My response is that it's 3 in the morning and your nephew just spoke for the first time in over a year and you've been standing upright through sheer discipline for 6 hours and I need someone to look at my shoulder and then we both need to sleep. She held his gaze. The rest of it will still be true in the morning. He looked at her for another moment. Then he pushed off the wall. The medical kit is this way. What? The 72 hours that followed were not dramatic. That was the thing she kept thinking afterward. That the most significant 72 hours of her life contained very little that a camera would have found interesting. Kong worked. He was in the primary room of the underground facility for most of those hours, with his people rotating in and out, and she understood from the fragments she caught, the tone of conversations, the specific tensions that moved through the room, that the financial architecture CO had built was being methodically taken apart. She didn't ask for details. She didn't need details. She watched the faces of the people coming in and out of the room and read them the way she read everything, in the margins, in what wasn't being said. She spent those hours with Minjun. This was the part that mattered most to her and that she knew she would carry longest. 48 hours in an underground facility with a 4-year-old. No toys beyond the red car and the one-eared bear. No materials, no prepared activities. Just the two of them and the bare walls and the functional lights and the quiet. Minjun spoke again on the second morning, not to her first, to the bear, she thought, a soft murmured sound she heard from the doorway before she came in. By the second afternoon, he had said 3 words she could identify, all of them Korean, and one that might have been English or might have been something else, a syllable that sounded like the beginning of her name. She did not make a big deal of any of it. She responded as though it were already ordinary, because she knew that the moment she marked it as extraordinary, she would make him self-conscious about it, and self-consciousness was the fastest road back to silence. She drew pictures with him using a pen she found and the blank backs of documents she asked permission to use. She taught him the shapes of American states from memory. She'd been good at geography as a kid, drawing rough outlines and giving them names, which he found absorbing. He pointed at one. Florida, she said. He pointed at it again. Florida. It's shaped like a boot that someone dropped in water. He pressed his lips together. She watched his shoulders move. Yeah, she said. I think so too. On the second night, she was sitting outside Minjun's room with her back against the wall. He'd wanted her close but had fallen asleep mid-sentence, which she was counting as a victory, when Kong appeared from the direction of the main room. He sat down against the wall beside her. Not close enough to crowd, enough that she was aware of him, which at this point she was aware of him from a room away and had given up pretending otherwise. The architecture is collapsing, he said. SEO's financial holds, the arrangements tied to them. She let out a slow breath. When? By morning. There are 3 remaining structures. They are being addressed simultaneously to prevent any single one triggering the others. He paused. SEO will know when it happens. He'll feel it the way you feel a building shift under you. And then he becomes a different problem. One I have been solving for 2 years and can continue solving without the leverage he had. A pause. The hospital in Atlanta will be clear by morning. Your sister is safe. She pressed her head back against the wall. Thank you. I should have... Don't. She turned her head and looked at him. You did what you could with what you had when you had it. That's all any of us do. She held his gaze. Stop carrying the version where you did it better. He looked at her for a long moment. You do that, he said. Do what? Reduce things to their actual size, not smaller, just actual. Something moved in his face. Most people in my life make things larger than they are, for various reasons. It is useful sometimes. Useful to be feared, useful to have people believe the scale of things around you is greater than it is. He looked at his hands, the gloves. You look at something and you see what it is. It's not a skill, she said. It's just paying attention. Most people don't pay attention. Most people are distracted by what they want to see. She shifted against the wall. Her shoulder ached in the dull, persistent way of something healing badly. You're not as unreadable as you think you are, for what it's worth. He was quiet for a moment. What do you read? Right now? She looked at him. At the gloved hands on his knees, the controlled posture that had gone slightly less controlled in the past 3 days, the lines around his eyes that had deepened. A man who has been the most dangerous person in every room he's entered for so long that he's forgotten what it's like to be tired in front of someone without it being a liability. He said nothing. You can be tired, she said. I'm not going to do anything with it. He looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at the wall opposite. And she watched something in him, not collapse, nothing that dramatic, but settle, like a held breath released very slowly. Jae-hyun, she said, testing the shape of it. He turned his head. Not the boss, not Mr. Kong. She held his gaze. Just that. Something happened to his face that she would never fully describe to anyone because she didn't think it translated. A shift that was too quiet and too complete for the words she had available. He looked at her, and he looked like a person, entirely, without the layers of architecture he'd built over whatever had been there before the assassination attempt, before the scar along his jaw, before the gloves and the walls, and the 5 years of deliberate untouchability. Yes, he said. They sat against the wall until she heard Min-jun shift in his sleep inside the room. She stood, carefully, favoring the shoulder. Sleep, she said. In a while. Now. She looked down at him. The financial architecture is collapsing and your people are handling it, and there's nothing you can do in the next 4 hours that isn't already in motion. Sleep. He looked up at her with an expression she was fairly sure no one else had ever aimed at him from this angle. You are remarkably difficult to argue with, he said. I've been told. She moved toward Min-jun's door, paused. Jae-hyun. He waited. Whatever happened 5 years ago, the woman, the betrayal, the reason for the gloves. She kept her voice even, not soft, even. You don't have to tell me, but I want you to know that I've been paying attention and I know it wasn't just the physical. And I know you've been carrying it in a way that was going to eventually become the only thing you were. A pause. It's not. Anymore. She went into Min-jun's room and didn't wait to see his face. By morning, the financial architecture was gone. Kong received the confirmation at 6:42 and came to find her in the small kitchen area where she was making coffee with the limited supplies available, and he said it without preamble. It's done. She poured 2 cups, handed him one. And Seo. Now he's mine to deal with on my terms, without leverage on you or your sister or Min-jun. His voice was professional, the way it was professional when he was being precise. It will take time, but it is a different situation than yesterday. How different? He can no longer touch what I am not willing to lose. He looked at the cup in his hand. That changes the nature of every move available to him. She understood the implication, understood that she was inside that sentence, in the category of what he was not willing to lose, and chose to let it sit without examination for the moment, because they were both standing in a kitchen at 6:40 in the morning, having not slept, and there was time for the examination later. When can we go back, she said. The estate will need to be assessed. A day, perhaps 2. We can return to the upper facility in the interim, a property I maintain in the city. He paused. It is more comfortable than this. Min-jun will want familiar things. I know, I've already had people retrieve specific items from the estate. A beat. The picture books? The blocks? The car collection. She looked at him. The car collection. He has 7. The red one is the one he carries, but there are 7. Something in his face was not quite a smile and not quite not one. I noticed. She looked at her coffee, thought about a man cataloging his nephew's car collection from a distance. Thought about picture books read through a 6-inch gap. He said safe, she said. Yes. That was the word he chose. After everything. She wrapped both hands around the cup. He chose that one first. Kong was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said again, differently. You did that. Whatever you've been doing in that house, the floor outside his door, the books, all of it, he knew. Even in the silence, he knew. She looked up. I want you to know that, because you've spent a lot of time thinking you were failing him. His jaw moved. He looked at the counter. I didn't know how to reach him. You reached him. You just didn't see it yet. She held his gaze when he looked back up. He said safe. That's you. That's the word he had for 14 months of you sitting outside his door. Kong looked at her for a long time. The kitchen was quiet. Underground, no windows, no weather, just the hum of the systems and the distant sound of his people and the smell of bad coffee. Amara, he said. Yeah. When this is over, when the estate is clear and CO is handled and your sister is… He stopped, restarted. I don't expect you to stay. Your contract, your obligations, I understand that what happened here is not what was agreed to. Are you asking me to leave? No. Immediate. No hesitation. I'm telling you that I understand if you choose to. She looked at him, at the gloves, at the scar along his jaw, at the face that had spent 5 years being sealed and had spent 3 weeks coming open by degrees in a cold mountain house because a child had reached for a stranger's hand in the dark. I'm not choosing to, she said. He held very still. I need to go to Atlanta, she said. I need to see Naomi. I need to see with my own eyes that she's okay. And then I need to have a conversation with her about what my life looks like right now because she is the person I make major decisions in consultation with. She held his gaze. But I'm coming back if you want me to come back. Yes, he said, very quiet. I want you to come back. Then I'm coming back. The coffee was bad. She drank it anyway. He drank his. Outside the underground facility, the morning was probably happening. The light probably coming over the mountains the way it came. The estate probably being assessed by Kang's people. The world probably continuing its ordinary business of continuing. Inside the kitchen, it was quiet, and they were both still standing, and it was enough. She flew to Atlanta 11 days later. The estate had been assessed, reinforced, and they'd returned to it 6 days after leaving the underground facility. In those 6 days, Minjun had spoken 14 words. Not continuously, not fluently. Single words and twice a 2-word phrase, small stones dropped into water, each one creating rings that she and Kang watched without remarking on. The speech therapist Kang brought in on day 4 was a woman in her 50s who had the specific patience of someone who had done this a long time and understood that the worst thing you could do was hurry it. On the morning Amara left for the airport, Minjun brought her the red car. She shook her head gently. That one's yours. It was your dad's. He held it for a moment. Then he put it in her hand and closed her fingers around it with both of his, the same gesture as before, deliberate, both hands, serious face. I'll bring it back, she said. He looked at her. I promise, she said. I'm coming back. 7 days. He took the car back, put it in his pocket. The keeping of it was the answer. Kong drove her to the airport himself, not Park. Him. They didn't talk much on the drive, which was not the same as having nothing to say. It was the comfortable kind of not talking, the kind that had taken 3 weeks to build and felt like something earned. At the terminal, he pulled to the curb and left the engine running, and she gathered her bag from the back seat. She opened her door and then stopped. The gloves, she said. He looked at his hands on the steering wheel. You don't have to explain them, she said. I'm not asking you to. She met his eyes. I'm just telling you that what happened 5 years ago, whatever she did, whatever it cost you, it didn't break something that can't be put back. It broke something that's already been put back, whether you can see it or not. He looked at her. His hands were still on the wheel. I know, he said, very quiet. Okay. She got out, shouldered her bag, leaned back down to the window. 7 days. 7 days, he said. She walked into the terminal, did not look back. It wasn't that kind of departure. Naomi was sitting up in her hospital bed when Amara came through the door, and her face went through 6 emotions in roughly 2 seconds before she said, You look like you got hit by a truck. The shoulder's mostly healed. That's not what I… Naomi looked at her with the particular acuity of someone who had known her for 22 years. You look different. I'm tired. You're always tired. This is different. She tilted her head. What happened in Korea? A lot. Define a lot. Amara sat in the chair beside the bed. looked at her sister. Thin, the lupus visible in the shadows under her eyes, and the particular way she held herself. But present, alert, alive. Naomi was alive, and the color in her face was better than it had been in 6 months, and the numbers on the chart on the wall were numbers she could look at without the sick drop in her stomach that had been her constant companion for a year. "I'm going back," Amara said. "That's the main thing I need to tell you." Naomi looked at her for a long moment. "To the job." "Yes." "And the—" "Yes, to the job." "And the man." "Naomi." "I've known you for 22 years, Amara. Don't Naomi me." Her sister's eyes were very sharp. "Tell me about him." She looked at the window. The Atlanta skyline doing what it always did, indifferent and familiar. "He has a 4-year-old nephew who stopped talking after his parents died," she said. "He's starting to talk again." She paused. "He reads picture books to the kid through a 6-inch door gap, late at night when nobody's watching, except I watched once." Naomi waited. "He's not a good man," Amara said. "Not in the way you'd want someone to be a good man. He's done things. I don't know all of them, and I probably don't want to know all of them." She held her own hands in her lap. "But there are things he's good at that matter, and one of them is this kid. And you. That's newer. But yes." "But yes." Naomi was quiet for a moment. Outside, somewhere in the hospital, something beeped and someone walked past the door, and the ordinary machinery of a healing place continued. "Is it safe?" Naomi said. "Safer than it was. Getting safer." She met her sister's eyes. "I'm not going to tell you it's without risk. I'm not going to lie to you." "Has anyone tried to hurt you?" "Yes." Naomi took a breath. "And?" "And I hit someone with a piece of wood, and Kong's people handled the rest." She watched her sister's face. "I'm not fragile, Naomi." "I know you're not fragile. I'm asking if the man you're going back to is worth what it costs." She thought about a picture book read through a gap, a red car left in a hallway, a word chosen after 431 days of silence, safe, of all the words in all the languages available to a 4-year-old's mind, safe. She thought about a man sitting in the driver's seat of a car at a terminal curb with his hands on the wheel and something open in his face that had been closed for 5 years. "Yes," she said. Naomi looked at her for a long time. Then she reached out and took Amara's hand, the right one, the unhurt arm, and held it the way she'd held it through their mother's funeral and through 2 years of waiting rooms and through every hard thing they'd moved through together. 7 days, she said. 7 days. And then you call me. Every week. I don't care what time it is there. Every week. And if he won't. You don't know that. I know enough. She squeezed her sister's hand. I know enough. She came back on the 7th day. Evening flight, the same long arc across the Pacific, but she slept this time. Not well, not comfortably, but she slept, which felt like evidence of something. Park picked her up from the airport. He said good evening in Korean, which she now knew was good evening, and she said it back, and his composure twitched slightly, and what she had learned was his version of pleased. The estate appeared out of the dark on the mountain road the same way it always had. Black stone, severe lines, windows like watching eyes. It looked exactly like it had the first night. She understood it differently now. Minjun was asleep. She asked, and Han told her, adding that he had asked 3 times during the day if the plane had landed yet, which Han delivered with the same flat composure as everything else, which did not conceal anything. Kong was in his office. She didn't go there immediately. She went to her room, larger than her Atlanta apartment, which was still true, and put her bag down and stood at the window for a moment looking at the dark beyond the glass. Then she went to the office and knocked and heard his voice and came in. He was at the desk. He looked up, and something in his face rearranged itself in a way she was beginning to know, the specific reorganization of a man who was not practiced at letting relief be visible on him. Good flight, she said. Adequate. She crossed to the chair across from his desk and sat. Naomi's numbers improved. Her doctor is optimistic about the next round of treatment. I know. I received the report this morning. He paused. With your permission. With my permission. I will continue to ensure the facility. I know. She met his eyes. Thank you. He looked at her for a moment, looked at his hands on the desk. Then, with the careful deliberateness of someone doing a thing they have been thinking about for 7 days, he reached up and removed the glove from his right hand. She went still. He set it on the desk beside the other. His hand was bare, a hand like any hand, a faint scar along 2 of the knuckles she hadn't seen before, the skin slightly paler than his face. He looked at it for a moment, like he was checking something. Then he looked at her. She reached across the desk and put her hand over his. Not grabbing, just present. The way she'd sat with Minjun on the floor. Close enough that it meant something, open enough that it was a choice. His hand was warm. He turned it slowly and held hers back. Neither of them spoke. The office was quiet, and the mountain was dark outside. And in the room down the hall, Minjun slept with the red car on the floor, where he could see it and the one-eared bear under his arm. And in Atlanta, a hospital room had better numbers on a chart. And in the estate's camera feed somewhere, Kang Jae-hyun held a woman's hand across a desk, in the light of a single lamp, and the footage would show 2 people sitting very still, which was not the same as nothing happening. It was in fact the opposite of nothing happening. "I made a list," she said finally, "on the plane. Things Minjun needs for the next phase. The speech therapist's recommendations, some materials I found that worked with the Boston kid, a couple of things I want to try." She held his gaze. "I want to go through it with you, not because I need your approval, because he's yours and you should know what's happening." He looked at her. Something in him settled, the same way it had in the underground corridor at 3 in the morning. "Yes," he said. "Tomorrow, when he's awake and we can all be in the same room." She squeezed his hand once, lightly. "Tonight you should sleep." "You sound like someone who gives orders," he said. "I sound like someone who's been watching you not sleep for a month." She stood, released his hand slowly, not abruptly. "The glove." He looked at it on the desk. "Leave it there tonight," she said. "See how that feels." She went to the door. "Amara." She turned. He was sitting at his desk with his bare hand resting on the wood, and the glove beside it, and the single lamp making the room smaller than it was. And he looked like a man who had been in a siege for 5 years and had just tonight decided to lay something down. "Thank you," he said, "for coming back." "I said I would," she said. "I don't say things I don't mean." She went to her room. The house was quiet in the way it was quiet now. Not the accumulated quiet of years of emptiness, but the quiet of a place where people were sleeping, which was a different thing entirely. Down the hall, a 4-year-old had his first word back and was accumulating more, slowly, the way you accumulated things you'd learned you were allowed to keep. In an office, a man was sitting with his bare hand on a desk, learning the same lesson in a different register. She got into bed. The mattress was still too soft. She had stopped noticing. She lay in the dark and listened to the house breathe around her and thought about all the distances she'd traveled to arrive in this specific silence, and whether she would have come if she'd known, not the danger, not the complexity, but the full weight of what it meant to walk into a house full of people who had forgotten how to let anything in and to be the thing that came in anyway. She would have come. She knew that. The answer was clear and immediate and said something about her that she'd known since she was 19 years old and became the person responsible for another person, which was that she did not have it in her to leave a door she could open. She closed her eyes. In the morning, Minjun would wake up and come to the kitchen, and she would make eggs too salty, and he would eat 2 bowls, and Kong would appear in the doorway, at some point in the way he appeared in doorways. Framed, watchful, the careful posture of a man learning how to enter rooms without always being ready to defend them. And the 3 of them would sit in the ordinary, complicated, difficult human business of becoming something to each other. It would not be easy. It would cost things. There would be days that were harder than the ridge, harder than the underground, harder than any of the visible dramatic moments, because the visible dramatic moments ended, and what came after them was the ongoing work of staying, which was quieter and more relentless and more real than any single night on a mountain. She knew all of that. She had always known all of that. She slept.